This is episode 44 of the Construction Leading Edge podcast from constructionleadingedge.com. My name is Todd DeWalt. My job is to help you grow your leadership skills, grow your business, and grow your income. Today, I have an interview with Randy Hall, President and CEO of Batson-Cook Construction, one of the largest general contractors in the Southeast. They're based in Atlanta. They've been around since 1915. They're one of the top 200 contractors according to ENR. And Randy talks about quite a few topics, some of which are what's more important than watching buildings grow. Talks about the importance of building your presentation and communication skills if you want to move up into senior leadership. His take on cross-training for leaders. A book recommendation that he shares talks about valuing people more than valuing the process. He's a reformed micromanager. There's a very interesting story about how he got converted from micromanagement. Talks about his leadership influences and some of the biggest challenges that our industry faces, as well as some advice for aspiring leaders and construction business owners. This is a great interview. Randy's a sharp guy. We're very fortunate to have him on the podcast. So without further ado, here is Mr. Randy Hall of Batson-Cook. Enjoy. All right, Randy, thanks so much for being on the podcast today. How's it going for you?
It's going excellent, Todd.
Excellent. So let's jump into it. If you would, tell us a little bit about what you do, and then if you could, tell us your story of how your career progressed up to the point where you're at today.
Sure. I have been president and CEO of Batson-Cook Construction Company since 2012. I still consider myself fairly new at this role. Most of my career has been in project management and operations side of our business, and I graduated from Auburn University in 1986. And I worked my way through college under the co-op program, so I had a fair amount of experience coming out of college. And my degree is in civil engineering, but I worked with a large commercial contractor, which turned me on to the construction industry. And most of my experience has been in large commercial work. I worked for a large commercial contractor, J.A. Jones Construction. They were based in Charlotte, North Carolina, and I worked in our Atlanta office coming out of school. And I worked for them for a few years, and then I was hungry for advancement, if you will, and I thought that my options would be better if I worked for a smaller company, which I did for about 5 years, and then realized that I really missed large commercial negotiated type projects, and then I came over to Batson-Cook in 1996, maybe in the early part of 1997, rolling back into a project management role, but primarily working on large projects. So over the last virtually 20 years, I spent most of my career here. I would say about half of it in maybe 5 or 6 years in the project management role, and then I moved into a leadership position managing one of 4 offices for our company. Then as I started to understand the succession planning from the previous CEO, he let me know that the path to his seat went through our Atlanta office. So I transferred back to our Atlanta office and ran this group here, and then transitioned into a role president, followed fairly quickly by the role of president and CEO. So that's a path that I took along the way here, and I learned something every day, and I still do that.
Good. Thanks for that summary. So I've got a couple of follow-ups for you. I want to talk about the transition from small, or maybe more accurately, the difference between small and large contractors, and then but let's start with the transition from operations and project management into executive leadership, because that seems to be a gap that some people have trouble navigating. So can you talk about what some of the keys are to making that transition from project management to general management or company management, and what are some of the tools that people need to pick up along the way to be successful?
Yeah, sure. The biggest difference that I realized, there are significant differences between working with smaller companies and larger companies, but the leadership transition is probably the same. And it didn't take me long to realize that, number one, you're only as good as the people that surround you, and that may sound like a cliche, but it is the absolute truth. And I can remember for most of my career, I got great satisfaction out of watching buildings grow, watching the building come out of the ground and then ultimately finishing it. And I enjoyed that. I still enjoy that. But when you go into a leadership role, you almost have to turn on that side of your brain that enjoys watching people grow as opposed to watching buildings grow. So that's to help people grow is significantly different than watching buildings grow. Technical skills are very important when you're building a building. Soft skills, emotional intelligence, we'll call it, becomes very important. So I spend a fair amount of time trying to become better at that, because as contractors, by and large, and even civil engineers maybe more so, are not trained in soft skills. And so I've spent a lot of time working on those skills more so than the technical skills over the last 10 years.
So what are a couple of things you do, if you don't mind me asking, to work on those soft skills, on the emotional intelligence and things like that?
Sure. Well, our company is 100 years old. Last year, we're in our 101st year of business, and I would say over the last 20 years, maybe longer, maybe 30 years, the majority of our work has been based on relationships and presentation skills and those kinds of things. So, as a general manager, moving from project manager into general management, those skills of making presentations and understanding how to communicate different than running a subcontractor meeting or a trade contractor meeting. There's much difference. So there's a gentleman here that I think may have been on one of your previous podcasts named Brent Darnell. Mm-hmm. Brent and I go way back to the days that I was a co-op student working on a project. I ran across Brent then, and he's been a close friend of mine ever since. And he teaches a program called, about leadership, and it involves emotional intelligence and skills. And so I've probably taken 3 courses personally with Brent, and we put several of our employees through that program that are on the track to make a transition from a purely technical approach to one of leadership of other people. So I think that's been a tool that we've used successfully. Also, I'm a big fan of cross training as you get beyond the project engineer and the project manager status. I think it's really important to begin volunteering to lead maybe internal initiative committees within a company, or just as well taking on leadership responsibilities in your community, whether it's with your church or your Rotary Club or anything that's outside, anything that will expose you to, that will cause you to learn how to lead other people. Because when you get in a leadership role, you really are only as successful as the people that are following your lead. And if you're not able to understand and appreciate the value of other people, then at least my experience is that you will not be successful.
So how important is it for us to get out of our comfort zone to pick up these skills? Because those of us, I came cut from the same cloth as you, civil engineering degree, general contractor my entire career, well, in construction my entire career, and then the soft skills are Frankly, I always hated those icebreaker exercises that we had at meetings and the team building exercises. Those always really bugged me when I was younger in my career. So how important is it to get out of your comfort zone to develop those kind of skills and be open to that?
Well, I think it's critical, personally, and that's partly because of my experience, but I have seen others to do it as well. And as contractors, when we're practicing for presentations, and most of the work that we do involves some form of presentation, it is difficult to practice because your words don't flow as easily as they do when you're running a meeting on the job site. So we encourage continuous practice for our presentations, but just for well-rounded leadership, I think it's critical to be able to work at leading an initiative to solve something that may not necessarily directly affect the project that you're on. I'm a strong proponent of that, and I'm not so strong that it has to be necessarily inside of our company. I think raising your hand to lead an initiative in your community will introduce you to the same people skills than it would in your own company. So we're always looking at people who raise their hand and want to cross train and learn more about leadership and not necessarily technical things that are associated with our business.
That's good advice. So to the folks who are the project managers, estimators, project engineers, raise your hand and look for those opportunities, whether it's inside your company or outside of work. And then to the business owners, if you would speak to the entrepreneurs, the proprietors who are running a construction company, talk to them a little bit about what they should do to encourage the growth of their people, not only themselves, but for the people that work for them that they're leading.
Well, so this might be an answer to a question earlier. We have adopted a program that was born out of a book called The Leadership Pipeline. I belonged to a couple of peer groups and I had learned that they had revamped their evaluation system and goals associated with the principles that are outlined in this book, The Leadership Pipeline. And as a company, we took our business unit leaders and we literally had a book club for, I would say, about 6 months. And we dissected the chapters and we tried to draw comparisons to how we run our business. And ultimately, over the course of a year, we've revamped our evaluation program to include goals that are for our company and goals that the employee offers as personal development goals. And we're rolling that program out this year, and so I would offer to you that if your evaluations need to be meaningful as business owners and not just a checklist, in part because I think it's the right thing to do. I think you get more results from a continuous evaluation program as opposed to a checklist at the end of the year, which is what most companies do. So that would be one piece of advice that I would offer, and especially the next generation of folks, the millennials. There's almost an expectation of continuous evaluation and communication between the supervisor and the young person that's just coming into the industry. And so we've worked really hard to develop our program with that in mind.
Good advice. Definitely good advice. One more follow-up question. I want to talk about, you've got the rare opportunity of working for small businesses and then working for very large businesses. Can you compare and contrast the difference between small businesses and large business? Because the folks on either side maybe think the grass is greener on the other side, or they think that there are inherent problems with the other side of the fence. Can you talk to that a little bit?
I can. My story may not exactly address that. I'm like most people that are hungry for advancement. I chose to go to work for a smaller company. It was a good company. Only they did work that I was not accustomed to doing. Most of their work was federal government work, and there's a whole different mindset when you're doing that. Not one that I particularly enjoy, and that's why our company, Batson-Cook, does not do a lot of that work because we're not of that mindset. So part of my struggle going in as a project manager for this smaller company was we were doing different type of work. It didn't take long to realize that larger companies are afforded some luxuries that smaller companies are not, and they range from help with assembling pay applications and having nice color copy machines and some amenities that go along with working with a larger contractor that I had to realize didn't come along with working with a smaller contractor. So those were some of the differences. But as I moved into a leadership role with that company, the principles of leading people are really the same, I think, between wherever you're working. And this is a long answer to your question, but my story is such that I was a pretty good project manager with the large company that I was with before, but thought I needed more room for quick advancement. Went to work for this smaller company, and sure enough, after maybe 2 years there, I was promoted to the role of Vice President of Operations, a role that I don't believe that I was ready for. In fact, I know I was not ready for. I'm not sure that I had earned it, but my leadership skills were not a place that allowed me to be a good leader of people, even though I was a very good project manager. And so I remember thinking that if everybody just did their operations work the way that I do it, then we're bound to be successful, right? I mean, I've done a good job. I've advanced at a quicker pace than I may have somewhere else with a more advanced leadership development program, but I was successful. And if everyone does it the way I did it, then so I was a manager that may have been termed a micromanager, and that is not a good form of leadership. I'll tell you, I feel like I failed miserably because leadership is all about getting people to follow you to the place that you're trying to take them, and they don't necessarily have to do things the way that you do them. And so I learned the hard way that my leadership style needed to be revamped. Ultimately, because I was struggling in the leadership role and I was doing work that I didn't particularly like with the clients that I didn't particularly understand, I went back into the large commercial contractor world. That's when I joined Batson-Cook, and I joined back in many ways, took a step down back to project management work, which I knew very well, and I was assigned to a really large project in Charlotte, North Carolina, and I felt very comfortable because that's a world that I was very comfortable in. I'll tell you, I remember, this is something that always stick out to me, and it may not mean as much to your listeners as it did to me, but I remember I had an administrative assistant back then. Even in the early 2000s, we still filed hard pieces of paper, as opposed to today where we just zip data files into folders. But back then we had big 4-drawer file cabinets, and we had 4 of them lined up next to each other because I was on a big project. And I remember my administrative assistant came to me and said, I'm going to file in alphabetical order from A through Z. And on the top drawer over here on the left cabinet, I'm going to go from A to H. And then I'm going to go over to the right to the next cabinet to the right, left to right, and I'm going to start with I, and I'm going to go on to the end. And I remember thinking to myself, that's the craziest thing I've ever heard. Everybody in the world knows that you go to the drawer below, you don't go to the right. And I remember saying, you know what, it really doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you go diagonal, as long as you can put your hands on the piece of paper when we need it. Mm-hmm. And to myself, as small as that may sound, to myself, I thought I had made a breakthrough, because for the first time I wasn't telling someone how to do there. I was setting the expectations and letting them get there the way that they wanted to get there. That's something I did not do well in my previous stint with a small company. And so from that point on, it was like an eye-opener. I wasn't micromanaging this person, and yet this person could get to the same place we were trying to get to, and it became easier to lead people with that concept. So from then on, I developed a mindset of being very clear about the expectation, but not being so hung up on the roadmap to get you there. And I attribute some of my success from that point on to that simple concept.
So, as a reformed micromanager, what was the big revelation or the mindset change that happened? Because obviously, micromanagers look at things very differently than where you're at now. So, what was the big change? Well, maybe another way to ask it would be, when you were in micromanagement mode, how did you view people? How did you view directions? How did you think about getting people to do things?
Well, I went from, mentally, we were not successful, and people were not following me. And I found myself working more time on success of projects than I needed to at the role and level that I was in. So that's the thing that became really clear to me when I decided to move to another company. It also and by the way, during that time of micromanagement mode, I do not recall respecting or valuing people very much. It was more about respecting and valuing processes. That's what I remember pretty clearly. So when I decided to move to another company, I had evaluated my own efforts and determined that, in my opinion, I had failed, and that I was going to do something different the next time. And even though I was going back into the role of project management, I just always felt like there would be a time when I'd get to have another shot at this, and I'd do things differently. So I think today my focus is more on valuing people than it is valuing processes, and that was a big step for me.
And it's part of emotional intelligence is self-awareness, to have the awareness to realize, hey, this is not working. I don't like the way that things are going, and I can improve. So I think that's a big takeaway for all of us, is that you need to be aware of how things are going. It's not just how you're wired. You can change the way you operate. So thank you for sharing that. Let's talk about the culture of a company. Can you share your thoughts on how important the culture of an organization really is?
Well, for me, it is the most important, and it is my top priority, and I'll tell you why. I think it would be if we had not gone through the recession that we went to and had to lay people off and then hire them back. But I think it would still have the same answer. But in particular, and most of your listeners will know that from 2008, maybe late 2008 to 2011, we went through the worst recession, certainly the worst recession in my career. And during that time, we lost a lot of revenue, and we lost, as a consequence, we had to lose some people. And so in 2012, when the economy started sputtering back, and our work volume began to pick up again, we found ourselves in a really strong hiring mode. We had dropped to about 200 people as a company for us from 450, which is a drastic reduction in workforce. We were in a hiring mode in really late 2011, 2012, 13, and 14. So over about 3 years, we hired another 250 people, and today, going into 16, we're up to about 500 plus people. So if you can step back and look at that, that means that, and by the way, we weren't hiring people that had worked for us. In most cases, we've hired people that did not work for us, and they work for our competitors in many cases, or other companies across the country, but construction companies nonetheless. So we looked up and, we started looking at the big picture, 12, 13, and 14. And in 14, it became clear to us that the majority of the people that worked for us have been working in our culture for less than 5 years. This is a real cultural risk, if you will. So I say this in orientation for everyone that comes to work for us. We appreciate and respect where you have been and what you have learned in that process, but we are not them. We are Batson-Cook Construction. And so to the best of my ability, I'm going to explain what our culture is all about. And so I do that on day one, and then I spend a lot of time throughout the year through quarterly meetings. We call them focus meetings, but we take a snapshot in time once a quarter, and with all of our people, we talk about how we're doing against our plan, and we talk about cultural things, because to me, the worst thing that can happen to Batson-Cook is to wake up and be performing with some bad habits that other companies have. And we're not perfect by any means, but we do have some cultural traits that we want to carry on for another 100 years. So I spend a lot of time focusing on culture, and I probably mention it more than most CEOs do. But the reason is we really have hired a lot of people, and I don't want to wake up tomorrow and find that we are the same people up here in this corporate office, but out there in the world we've become someone else. That's a real issue for me.
That's good. So culture versus a robust policy manual, which is more important?
Oh, we fight at Batson-Cook. We fight policy manuals every day. I mean, we really do. We do a lot of work, and we got a lot of people that are spread out from Denver, Colorado to South Florida, and we're even looking yesterday in Cincinnati, Ohio. Our territory is primarily the Southeast, but we do work in other places when clients ask us to go there. And the more spread out that we get and the larger that we get, the more apt we are to think about making a policy manual, if you will, a direction manual that anyone could come in and follow. And I fight that a lot, because I think, and I understand, the bigger you get, there's a time and point where you need to have a manual that explains everything. But I'm of the opinion that that those companies that have a policy manual that addresses everything you do and how you do it, you begin to take the creative side of people out, and they begin to think, or they begin to stop thinking and start opening the manual. And I think that's not our culture. Our culture is to define the expectations, give training on how we do it, but then invite people to raise their hand and say, I think there's a better way. We're heavy into lean construction here, and one of the mottos that we have is every pair of hands comes with a free brain, meaning that we appreciate your hands and the stuff that you can do. We appreciate that you can follow instructions, but we really like you to think. And so that is our culture. Our policy manual driven company begins to chip away at that thinking side of people.
And that seems like that's a real challenge, because the temptation would be create the policy. It's easier to hand out policy books and pat yourself on the back than it is to have that touchy-feely culture, which is harder to measure, harder to refer to. But I would agree. The consistent feedback I get is culture over policy any day. Let me shift gears on you a little bit. What are some of the leadership influences that you are taking in, either people, books, courses? You mentioned Brent Darnell, and I would mention to anybody listening, if you want, I did interview Brent Darnell in episode 16 on this podcast, but what are some of the other leadership influences that were the wells that you're drawing from?
Well, so over the years, at least my time at Batson-Cook, I have learned to listen and observe, and I think that's a skill that every leader should work on. And so my professional development has come in the form of it's the same thing that I've mentioned a while ago, that become a leader in places that are not necessarily in your work environment, and see how that works out. So I'm a big fan of the Associated General Contractors. I'm a member of the AGC Georgia, as well as in an officer role. And so I've learned a whole lot. And that the AGC, by the way, nationally is a healthy mixture of very small leaders, company leaders, and large company leaders. And so I have, over the 20 years, had an opportunity to observe and try and take away the good traits that I'd like to form my leadership skills around from many folks in the AGC. I'm also a big fan of peer groups. So I'm involved in 2 peer groups, one with a group of 5 members, 5 like-size contractor, like-cultured contractor members, and then another group of 8. That group of 8 is managed by a company called Sales Management Institute, which we learn a lot from that organization. And so just being a part of a peer group that's dealing with the day-to-day things that we all deal with, and believe it or not, our industry, there's not much of a secret sauce. We all do business pretty much the same way, but we all handle problems and issues in our companies differently. So in a peer group environment, you're afforded the opportunity to say, this is what I'm struggling with right now. But have you ever had this? And I can't remember a time where any peer group meeting there wasn't somebody in the room that said, oh yeah, I deal with that daily, and here's how I deal with it. So I would attribute my leadership skills in some way to peer group involvement, and in my case, being a part of the Associated General Contractors. And I would even attribute this to being part of in a community way. I belong to organizations that on occasion calls me to lead people, and sometimes I do a really good job, and sometimes I don't do a great job, but I'll learn from it. So that would be my encouragement is if you're a business leader or business owner out there, and you don't think you have things going as smoothly as they ought to be, find a way to get a group of other peers. My peer groups are all with like-sized companies that do the same thing that we do, but they're in markets that we don't compete. That's one of the rules. So we're not sharing things that will be used against us, if you will. So I would encourage all to be involved in peer groups and outside organizations that where you're around people who do what you do, and you will learn that there are some people that are more successful to you because of the way they lead, and it won't take you long to self-evaluate.
Solid advice. Here's a big question for you. What's one of the biggest challenges to our industry that people are not talking about enough?
Well, I believe that as an industry, we need to focus on creating a sustainable workforce for the industry. We've talked about it a lot, but we've not taken much action as an industry. We've just talked about how bad it's going to be one day when all these guys retire, or when kids are not attracted to this industry, or when the federal laws keep a certain group from being able to work with us, and what are we going to do about it? We haven't taken any real action to do something about it. So at Batson-Cook, in conjunction with the Associated General Contractors of Georgia, we're making a strong push, trying to go from a mode of strategizing about how bad it could be when the workforce is dwindled to actually, what are we going to do about it? And my involvement in that has taught me things. I understand that in our state, the state of Georgia, that a relatively small percentage of high school students go on to get a 4-year college degree, like 4 out of 10, and that may be liberal. Less than that actually graduate from college. So the other 6 out of 10 either are high school dropouts, or they come out of school and they think because their only choice offered to them in the school system has been college, they think they just have to go get a job making minimum wage. And we think they take 5 to 7 years before they realize that it's hard to make a living. It's hard to support a family off of minimum wage. So we see our technical school average age of enrollment in our technical school system, which is very good in the state of Georgia, by the way, is about 25, 26 years old. So that means from high school age of 18 to technical college age, there's a big group of kids that are going out and trying to make it on minimum wage. And then they realize that they can't do that somewhere 6 or 7 years later, around 25 or 26 years old, and they jump into technical college and they start to learn a trade. And I think it's because we haven't told them that construction is a great option. We do not start people at minimum wage. It's a great way to raise a family, and our high school counselors have not been encouraged to offer or to share that as a really good opportunity. So at Batson-Cook, we've developed a workforce development committee. We have adopted one technical college, and we're in the process of adopting 3 high schools. We are close to sharing our vision of an intern program that would begin to expose high school students on a part-time basis to our industry and what we do. And out the other end, or at the end of the day, we hope that we will begin to turn young people on to consider our industry if college is not an option for them. And there's nothing wrong with that. You make a good living for your family. So that is an issue that I wouldn't say we haven't talked about as an industry, but we certainly have not taken any action on it. And we're on a mission to offer that as an alternative, not to fill the trade force void that we have today, but to create a sustainable program whereby kids would appreciate that the construction industry is a professional industry. It's one to be proud of, and it's one that can make a good living for your family, not just while we're coming out of a recession, but for years and years and years to come. So that's a long answer to your question as well, but that's what I think as an industry we need to pay real close attention to.
Very good, very good. I would agree. It's not very helpful to be problem aware and focus on the problem. That's not going to get anywhere, but we really have to take some action and go solve it, do something. Talking about it's not going to solve it. So we got just a couple more minutes. I've got one more question for you before I ask you where folks can get in touch with you or connect with you. And that question is, you've got an audience right now listening to this podcast of quite a few construction business owners, construction business leaders, folks who want to start a construction business. So if you were in the room with 500 folks that fit that bill, and you had just a couple of minutes to share some actionable advice with them, what would that be?
Well, my advice would be to first dedicate more time to your own personal health and quality time for your family. That may not sound like good construction business owner advice, but it is. I would also say if you're leading a company or owning a company that you ought to work hard to create an environment where people are respected and valued. Just that simple. By and large, I think people want to contribute. The majority of the people that I'm around want to do the right thing and they want to do good things. Sometimes working in an environment where it's uncomfortable stifles that yearning to do good. So I'd say work hard to create an environment that allows people to be happy while they contribute. So those things are not hard from a leadership standpoint. I think everybody ought to be passionate about what they do, and I think they ought to be hungry for knowledge. And I think we all can do a better job of listening. Sometime I've worked really hard personally on that trait, and most of those I just mentioned are soft skills. They're what I would call emotional intelligence skills. They're not technical skills. And I would say to those who are leading companies, those are the things that you ought to be focusing on.
Yeah, great advice. Definitely going against the grain of old school construction leadership thinking, but I would definitely agree. It's very important.
Todd, when I was a co-op student 35 years ago, there was a gentleman under the old-fashioned leadership style that brought me in his office, and he said, "You'll never make it in this industry. You might as well stop now." I remember his name, and I could tell you who he is and where he lives, because I have never forgotten that. Now, that turned me into that generated passion for me to learn all that I could. It's probably why I wasn't a very good leader to begin with in my first stint back in the early '90s, because I really was micromanaging and just to make sure every T was dotted, or T was crossed and the I was dotted. But at the end, that's not the best way to lead, is to tell people at a very early age that you'll never make it. The better way is to help them find out how to be as successful as they could, and then help them get there.
Yeah, great advice. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. Well, we're pretty much out of time here. If people want to connect with you or follow you, are you on social media, or is it okay if they hit you up on LinkedIn? Are there a couple of places or one way that folks can connect with you?
Absolutely. We, as a company, we're active in the social media spaces of Twitter, and more so on LinkedIn. And so you can look me up on LinkedIn under Randy Hall, Batson-Cook Construction, Atlanta, Georgia. And I'm happy to. I'll admit that I may not be as prompt as I could be if I weren't occupied with things here in the company, but to communicate that way.
I'm sure you've got a few things going on with 500 people, so if it takes a while to respond or accept that invitation, then we'll definitely understand. So, Randy, thanks so much for being on the podcast. I know you're a busy guy, and this is really great, very helpful. I appreciate you taking the time to share with us. Great,
Todd. Good to. Thanks for inviting me.
I hope you got something out of that interview with Mr. Randy Hall. Be sure to go to constructionleadingedge.com/044 for the show notes. Be sure to check out that book recommendation that Randy had as well. Hey, if you want to join the Construction Leading Edge Nation and keep track of what's going on, get inside information ahead of everybody else in the world, go to constructionleadingedge.com/nation. Or just go to the website, look for the big green button that says Join the Construction Leading Edge Nation. I'll send you some good stuff. Thanks for listening. See you next time.